What about the state of the art? So intelligent compressors, we've mentioned we've got all of these parameters: threshold, ratio, attack, release. It keeps you guys very busy, especially if you're working in live sound and you have to adjust a compressor during the show. And it's not easy to use, and an amateur is going to have a real hard time getting things to sound right. And you probably all heard examples of things that were compressed and didn't sound very good. But for a lot of cases, how do you decide, say, what the attack and release time should be? Well, you listen to the signal. You see how it sounds compressed for certain values of attack, certain values of release. You know, say, if you're dealing with just drums versus, I don't know, violin, you're going to pick very different values for them. You can get the software to do a lot of the listening and to pick reasonable values there. So that's the goal of intelligent compressor design. They're starting to appear in the market. Automate most of the compressor parameters based on having the software or the hardware analyze the signal. So we created one. My first attempt at a sample, playing some audio here. Let's hear the uncompressed original bass. So now we're going to play that sample, but it's been automatically compressed. So we have a compressor where we just say we want a little compression or a lot of compression. We just have a dial that, you know, is amount of compression. And it tries to then automatically set all of the parameters. And it will set them differently depending on the signal coming in. But it will essentially look at the signal coming in and process it in real time. So it may adjust the attack time over time as the signal changes. So here's the bass compressed. Okay, in the interest of time, I'm not going to go through all the audio samples, but don't worry, the really fun ones that are coming up in a while, I'll show you. So how do we know if our compressor is any good? That was the real question with this work. You know, we put a lot of effort into coming up with these ideas of, you know, how do you decide what the knee width should be for a given signal. But then we needed to test it. So the way in which we did that is we got 9 professionals, you know, people who make a living doing compression. One of them was only live sound, but the others are all working in studios. And we got 7 amateurs, people, home studios, people who use compressors but don't necessarily get paid a lot of money for it. And we asked them, you know, do it the way that you would in your studio or at home, but basically here's a signal and we want to adjust the threshold by so much. How would you adjust everything else? We want to adjust we've said everything else. How do you make it sound the same loudness as the original? So figure out the makeup game. And then we saw whether our values agreed with the professionals or the amateurs or both. So how do we decide what are the attack and release times? Well, we know that if you set them too short, then on a steady state, unchanging signal, you're going to introduce distortion. You're changing that signal, you're basically clipping it. It's like saturation. So set them too short, it's a problem. Set them too long, and then or a long release, and then you have a transient, and it doesn't go back to normal quick enough, and there's what's known as a dropout. Long attack, it generates an overshoot. The signal jumps up and starts changing, and then only later does it actually kick in. So there's normal values that you can set them to, and you analyze how much the signal is rapidly changing Is it a steady state or what's known as a transient signal? Depending on that, you pick the attack and release. Here we have what professionals and amateurs chose for a bass sample, the one you just heard, for a guitar sample, vocals, and drums. For the, I think it's attack on top, attack on top, release and bottom. And so we have the plus mark is what the sort of automatic or intelligent compressor chose. The minus mark is the average value of, in this case, what the professionals chose. And that's sort of the range of values that most people chose. Generally, it's pretty good. There's, in most cases, we're close to the mark. There's a few funny extremes. The vocals here, the amateurs picked, here the amateurs actually had a lot of agreement, whereas the professionals had wide disagreement with each other. But most cases were pretty good in choosing attack and release. Setting the knee, well, if we apply a lot of compression, sort of makes sense to have a soft knee. If we apply a little compression, then you can have a harder knee because it's only going to be activated slightly. And then if you're dealing with a very transient signal, a percussive signal, then you want a knee that is actually very flexible, that adjusts to lots of different dynamics in the signal. So we applied this, looking at drums and bass, again, fairly good agreement between automatic and what the users chose. And then, did I skip one? Makeup gain, we tried two things, and there are some automatic makeup gains on the market, but they don't do what this does. We first tried something that just basically tried to estimate the level of the original signal, average level, and put that level back in. But the problem is that the compressor changes the loudness, and loudness isn't the same as level. So we needed a really good loudness model. We played around with a few, and we finally got a good one. So our initial attempts were quite a bit off. The people thought they need about 13 dBs of makeup gain to make the compressed sound like the original, but our initial system only put in about 9 or 10. We used a better model, it worked even better. So that's an intelligent compressor. And very briefly, because it is getting late, I'm going to describe the main research that my research group are involved in. And that's automatic mixing. That is not, and I need to say this because a few people have completely misinterpreted, it is not trying to put you all out of a job. Rather, it is trying to deal with what the editor of Sound on Sound said. And it was quite interesting. He wrote this after we'd started the research, but it was really exactly saying what we're trying to do. So this was an editorial in Sound on Sound, and he wrote, "There's no reason why a band recording using reasonably conventional instrumentation shouldn't be EQ'd and balanced automatically by advanced audio workstation software." And another point in here, he said, musicians would rather get on with making music than get too deep into engineering. You know, they just want stuff that sounds good. And audio interfaces can come with a gain learn mode. The workstations can optimize their own mixer and plug in gain structure while preserving the same mix balance. So the idea is, and this to preach, this is what has been going on throughout history. Someone comes along and automates something, and when the automation comes in, everyone's worried, well, you know, I used to drive a horse and buggy, and now these damn cars come along. Am I still going to have a job? They probably won't even have something called a taxi driver with these new crazy cars coming along. They did, and there were more of them around. The idea is if you automate the more technical aspects of music production, it enables people to do more creative things on top of them. And so that's what this tries to do.